So I don't want to bury the lead on this one. Emily's a fantastic movie. And that's more or less what we're going to say for the next 25 minutes.
Just over and over and over.
Yeah, but I wanted to... I've been trying to dial in why this is so good, why this work of art worked so well for me. And I put a lot of time into this.
I think I know why.
I wanted to... Why?
Because it was about writing.
Well, partially, yeah. So I tried to develop this sort of theory, and it's sort of a note on personal preference. And I was trying to put together all the movies that really mean a lot to me, and to find some sort of common themes or denominators between them. And the movies that appeal to me the most, and this is mostly a movie conversation, movies about writing or creating art in some sort of period setting.
I was going to say, it's the period drama element as well.
But the period can be anything. It just can't be right now.
Because right now sucks.
So it's like movies about writing or creating art in some sort of period setting, preferably with a dark academia aesthetic if I can get it. Where it's colorful, but also sort of faded. It's got gorgeous vistas, very, very minimal technology, and room to breathe in the visuals. I also, if I can get it, I would like the movie to be somewhat about religion, but not actually be a religious movie. I want it to specifically play with the philosophical tangles of religion.
Right, but not like they wouldn't stream it on PureFlix.
Without pushing any sort of answer. But I love those questions. I don't like anyone's answer to any of those questions.
Yeah.
I like the questions.
Sure. So like what movies are in those categories?
I'm about to get to that.
Okay.
And other sidebar, if I can get some fraught family drama in there, some powerhouse character portraits, ongoing turmoil, complexity, that's all good too. Highlights of this very personal, highly curated canon.
Okay.
Faustus.
Of course.
That's my
Dr.
number one.
Faustus.
You guys know that. Dr. Faustus, Christopher Marlowe, best work of art ever made. Similarly, Amadeus.
The movie or the play or both?
Both.
Okay.
But mostly the movie.
The one about Mozart, if you don't know.
Right. And that's a barn burner. Whiplash. Dead Poet Society. Little Women from a few years ago. That was I thought that was just unbelievable.
That movie was incredible.
All Is True, which is Kenneth Branagh's movie where he plays sort of Shakespeare in the twilight of his years.
I saw that. I loved that.
Midnight in Paris with Owen Wilson.
Yeah. Man, that
movie
is
incredible.
So special.
Black Swan.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should do something on that.
Yeah.
Black Swan, which was one of the first like psychological screwed up thrillers you and I ever saw.
Yeah, that's like the first horror movie I ever saw.
And that's from Darren Aronofsky. I think The Whale also fits into this canon. Colette, which I know you haven't seen.
Oh, yeah.
The Exorcist. Banshees of Inisherin. Possibly also The Shining, The Witch, All the President's Men, Shakespeare in Love, Zodiac, and Loving Vincent. For me, these are some of the most thrilling, devastating, life-changing stories ever told.
Would you put Goodfellas in there?
No.
Okay. I don't know. We got the period drama, family. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Maybe. Anyway. There's less of the creating art in that one.
Of course.
But yeah, for me, those are the stories that legitimately changed and shaped my entire life.
Yes.
Emily immediately joins the ranks of those movies as an all-timer. And this is the writing and directing debut of Frances O'Connor, who has been an award-winning actor for decades. She was in the 1999 Mansfield Park. She was in Conjuring 2, about 50 other things.
Yeah.
And for this to be a debut and to join that pantheon for me, I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that and almost marvel at it.
Yeah.
Because this blew me away. Like we sat through the credits. I mean, you were ready to leave. But I just kind of sat there for a while.
No, I wasn't ready to leave.
No, not in a bad way.
Okay.
I just mean you didn't want to sit through the entire credits. We don't usually do that.
The entire credits, no. Yeah.
But I found this to be genuinely breathtaking. Every shot, the colors, they were... If you watch the trailer, if you look on IMDb, the colors are muted, but also they're almost surging through that muted palette. They feel alive.
They're quite saturated, but in this like gray way.
Everything about the film felt alive, repressed, and desperate. I was trying to put this into words while I was watching, and that's sort of why I wanted to sit through the credits, because I wanted to live in that world a little longer. Because when we got up and left the theater, that was it. Like, you can ride the roller coaster again, but it's never quite the same. You don't have that thrill of discovery. And as immersed as I was in every scene of the movie, I was almost trying to quantify or qualify that feeling while I was watching it. Because there was this sense of awe over and over. Like, at every shot of this movie, it was... I nailed it down to 3 words. I want to hear what you think of this. The beauty of composition, in every shot, the clarity of symbolism and storytelling, and then the sense of purpose. At all times, I thought this was just an immaculately constructed and realized vision from a writer-director.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Can you list those again so I can really get
Beauty, clarity, and purpose.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, because I feel like it is like the thing that strikes you first is the visual beauty of it. But not just visually, it's the beauty of the characters, it's the beauty of the writing, it's the beauty of the storytelling. And clarity, too, I think is interesting because Emily Bronte is such an enigmatic figure. Like, historically, like, we really don't know a ton about her because she was so reclusive. And even in this story, she is very strange and reclusive and hard to understand. But we're so in her head that we still kind of, it's very clear how she is seeing the world. And I find that really, really special. And the last word is...
purpose.
Yeah.
There was I like what you just said about seeing Emily's sort of enigmatic character so strongly. There was such a sense of perspective because she's a very uncomfortable character.
Yeah.
She's not especially verbose. She's not eager to tell you about how she sees the world or what she's thinking.
No.
But part of the magic is in how the story was constructed. Part of it is how it's cast. I want to talk about those two things for a second.
Yeah, sure.
First, the structure. Emily lives in a very small world. We're not spoiling anything in this discussion, but...
Oh, okay.
Or I am, or I'm not.
Yeah, I guess I won't either.
No, you can. I'm just saying, to make this point,
I can avoid... I mean, there's not much to spoil, but
Sure.
Yeah, I can avoid, yeah.
The story almost felt like it was divided into chapters, where each one had a different, almost main companion, where Emily's in pretty much every scene. And then you'll have... kind of one person along there with her. Like the chapters, you have one with the brother, one with the older sister, one with the love interest, and then later again with the older sister in a very different context.
Yeah.
And while there are sort of ensemble scenes, family interactions, most of the movie is these one-on-ones, which means you get much more efficient characterization. You get fuller characters. You see Emily herself more clearly. And because it's always this one-on-one, you see how she changes in their company, how she's influenced by the expectations and the disapproval of the older sister, by the freewheeling encouragement of her brother Branwell, who, by the way, was the lead actor in Dunkirk.
Oh, that's
And I think this is a beautiful evolution for him.
Yeah.
He was fantastic
He was
here.
really good.
And for a side character to have that much range and conflict, by the end of the movie, it felt like when you see Shakespeare on stage and the actors double, where they play multiple roles.
Yeah.
Because the character had gone through so much and changed so much.
Right.
It was just such a passionate character piece. But the other half of that magic, of course, is casting. Getting someone who can play these roles that entail so much maturation in them over not a long period of time.
Right.
And I think the casting is the other sort of dream of this movie. Emma Mackey is the MVP of Sex Education.
Oh, yeah.
And I think next to like Tom Hardy, she's the absolute gold standard for facial acting.
She's really incredible.
And balancing her, the love interest is the king of tragedy, Oliver Jackson Cohen, who's Luke from The Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah.
The looks between these two.
Oh my gosh.
The glances, the eyebrow arching, the hesitation, the subtext that these two actors created is titanic.
It's really, really cool.
And when you actually get to see them together, not just kind of flirting in that British way, when you actually see them together, the chemistry is electric. This
really,
pairing's
really good.
incredible.
Yeah, they did an excellent job. And I liked how... I mean, so I looked it up, and this romance, there's no evidence to suggest that this ever happened.
Sure.
He was a real person. I forget his name now. It starts with a W. William
Whiteman?
Something like that. Anyway, he was a real person. And there actually is some evidence that maybe he had an affair with Anne, the younger sister.
Interesting.
But that's like, I mean, what I'm going to keep coming back to is the point of this movie is not to be accurate. Like, that's not the point. But I like that they have this romance that's so terribly tragic and full of longing and just unsatisfied, unrequited love.
Sure.
And it can never be, and it's so tragic because it is so similar to what happens in Wuthering Heights. I don't want to spoil Wuthering Heights, I guess.
No, it's
but like,
I haven't read that for context.
Cam hasn't read it yet. I have. I read it, but I read it like in high school. It's been a long time, but I loved it. There's no evidence that Emily Bronte ever had any sort of romantic relationship. She never married. I mean, that doesn't mean she didn't, but she died when she was 30, which is very terrifying to me as a person who's turning 30 this year. But anyway, so she, you know, there's no evidence that she had this romance, but everybody was like, how could she have written this beautifully tragic romantic story without having experienced romance herself? And I think that's a dumb argument. I don't think you have to experience something to write about it. But
of course not.
I find it fascinating to do that in this movie as a way of exploring that side of her consciousness. Sure. I think this movie is really about Emily Bronte's way of seeing the world, and it's about how, like, what's going on in her brain. And so even though this type of romance may have never happened to her, seeing it play out in this movie, I think worked really beautifully. And the casting is really excellently done in that regard.
I don't think, to sort of piggyback that point, I don't think great art is ever about accuracy.
No.
I think if anything, it's about honesty. Or pursuing some sort of truth. I mean, I've talked about this in visual art, in the context of paintings or comics or any sort of drawn or painted medium. I have no use for realism or hyperrealism or any of that. Nothing bores me out of a comic book more than realistic drawing.
Sure.
I want style. I want expression.
As a way to express truth.
Of course, that's what tells the story.
Yeah,
I don't want action figures just posed in these boring, but the musculature is totally, I don't care about that.
Yeah.
Give me Hellboy. Give me Mike Mignola.
And like we talked about this a lot when we did our episode on Pride and Prejudice, 2005, about how that movie is not book accurate, and it's really not that historically accurate, but
it's great.
But that is not the point. And we talked a lot about, I really encourage you to listen to that, because I'm going to kind of build upon a lot of those points. We did one on Emma as well,
and Persuasion.
That's right.
We've done a bunch of these.
We did a bunch of these, yeah. But it does things. It has us look at these stories from the past through a modern lens in order to better understand the truth of the story. And I think a great example of that in this movie is the opium. Because we see Emily using opium quite a lot, especially her brother uses it even more. She's like influenced by her brother. Her brother was only a year older than her, and they were pretty close. And you see that relationship be really strong here.
Yeah, not a great influence.
No, not so much. And it seems that, like, historically, Branwell, he did use opium quite a lot, and it was like a problem. But if you think about opium in the 1830s, 1840s, because Emily Bronte is born in 1818, she dies in 1848. So the majority of this movie seems to be taking place in the 1830s and 40s.
Right towards the end.
Yeah. I mean, we see her when she's a bit younger, when she first goes off to school and stuff. So it kind of takes place over a long period of time. But anyway, in that time, the use of opium was incredibly common, and it was not regulated at all. Like, you could just buy it at the store.
Sure.
Like, it wasn't a thing.
Cocaine used to be like that too.
Right. And that didn't happen until later in the century. So cocaine's not really around at this time, but it's really opium. But like a lot of people think about the Victorian period, you know, the 19th century England, as like this very prim and proper, no one did anything wrong, like 1950s basically. But actually everybody was just doing drugs all the time.
Right. They just didn't publish that part. So that's not part of our historical record.
And also the scientific understanding of those drugs was not there.
Right.
And so no one saw it as a problem. Like around, I think, the 1860s, people started to regulate opium, but like the crisis of addiction wasn't really a thing that people talked about until the 20th century. So my point is, Emily using opium, and I don't know if there's any historical evidence that she did use opium, but again, that's not the point. Her using opium in this movie, we see it in 2023 as this like bad thing, like this thing that's dangerous and might appear to us as improper and like inappropriate, right? Because you see her like show up to that party high when she's made that cake.
Oh, right.
And like everyone's very embarrassed for and on behalf of
tell.
And because of her.
Right.
Like and it's seen as like her doing opium is seen as this bad thing. It not bad as in morally bad, but as in like not correct and just societally inappropriate, because that's how drug use is seen by us today. I mean, unless you're like at a party, but like being in like proper society at a family event, showing up high is probably not gonna look good.
Sure.
And we recognize addiction as like a medical problem, and you know, we could talk all about that. But at this time period, opium use wouldn't have been seen that way. But I think by kind of like putting it in that lens, it helps us understand Emily's unconventionality and her inappropriate behavior. Do you know what I'm saying?
It felt like experimentation, because the association I have with sort of a fledgling artist experimenting with drugs is that they're trying to live up to that sort of freewheeling, like Rolling Stones sort of artistic lifestyle.
Especially in the Romantic period, a lot of artists were actually using drugs for that exact reason.
But it almost reminded me of that mid 20th century context of drugs as sort of that mind expanding,
the gateway,
freedom and accessibility of Sgt. Pepper and all. That's almost how I read it.
Sure.
As her. Like it was a shortcut into that mindset of creation.
Yeah, I think let me be clear. I think you're right. I think they were using her drug use in that way, but like also like her desire to be this like free thinking, like uninhibited artist was kind of seen as like societally inappropriate.
Oh, definitely.
And so so her drug use is part of that.
Yes,
even though technically in that time, the use of opium, I don't think would have been considered, like wouldn't have been looked at like that.
But I like that parallel between how the society and especially the sort of the rigidity of her family life, they didn't want her to be doing drugs any more than they really wanted her to be writing.
Exactly.
They wanted her to go be the teacher and be the housewife and do that.
Exactly.
So
but she was incapable of living up to those expectations. She couldn't go to that school. It's unclear why. That's the other thing I like, is that we don't understand really what is quote unquote wrong with Emily. Like we see her go to the school and we see it not go well. We see her,
and it seems like she doesn't really understand.
Right. We see her like she's called the strange one by people in the town.
Right.
And so we are like, does she have anxiety? Is she having panic attacks? Is she on the autism spectrum? Does she have depression? Like it's not really clear what is going on with her. And that's great because back then they wouldn't have had words for those either.
Of course. Like when the priest screams at her that she's ungodly, that would have been the reaction. They torture someone with some fake exorcism thing. I mean, half of when they investigate those things, it's usually someone who has some sort of mental issue, and the priest is torturing the kid for a while to try to get the devil out.
Right. Or they just give them opium and cocaine.
Right.
Which was great. But so the point is, she's unable to exist in those spaces and achieve the things that the people around her want to achieve. And so things like her drug use, her writing, her inability to go to the school, all contribute to that. I think the other piece here is her hair.
Oh, interesting.
So throughout most of the movie, Emily's hair is down. It is like shoulder length, parted in the middle, and just free flowing down, which doesn't seem that weird to a modern audience and looks very nice and romantic to us. And I think that's one way of looking at, like, oh, it looks very free and romantic. But at this time, I think around the age of like 15, 16, women would start wearing their hair up. At all times. And in this period specifically, it is like parted in the middle, and like the hairstyles that you see them wearing are pretty period accurate, which I appreciated because sometimes some movies will, like Pride and Prejudice, for example, will do a more flattering hairstyle, like flattering for our modern sensibilities, because the way that they wore their hair in the 1830s was ugly and was not flattering on anybody, because it's like covering their ears and it's these ringlets and it's very weird. Kind of
bowl cut thing.
Yeah, it's like, it's not very cute, but that's like, from everything we can tell, that's what they did.
Rough.
But there are so many scenes where Emily is just wearing her hair down, and not just like at home, but like around her brother, which is one thing, but then also around the curate, the love interest. Right. And just when she's just out, like her hair is down, and that would have been seen as either, scandalous and inappropriate or childish. Because again, when you're a young girl, you wear your hair down because you're a kid.
But it lacks the maturity that you see in Anne. Because she always, like the sisters and the rest of the women in the movie, both of them, they have that rigidity. They're living up to the expectations and the standards of the time.
So not only is she being unconventional and inappropriate, I think the childlike thing is important too, because you see her wanting to continue writing her stories and wanting to act them out in this like way that to others seems childlike and immature. But she's like wanting to stay in that. Like she doesn't want things to change. She doesn't want to leave home. She doesn't want to stop writing her fun like adventure stories. She wants to keep her hair down. So I think that contributes to her oddity as well.
There are these like soft-spoken rebellions, whether it's the hair, the profession, everything about her really is just sort of this slight disobedience of the time. And you see the disapproval from the world around her. The movie strikes this tone that I was so impressed by because it wasn't embarrassingly modernized. I saw people online comparing this to Fleabag, and I saw that comparison more with the recent Persuasion movie.
Yeah, right.
Which Dakota Johnson was incredible in that.
She was so good.
But the movie wasn't great.
No, it was fine.
Like, we got something out of it.
Yeah.
But I feel like you had to look harder.
Yeah, I really liked it, but it didn't feel as timeless as this one did.
And this one, I think part of the strength of Emily is that it doesn't have any almost embarrassing attempts to modernize the story where it starts to feel condescending, where it's like, well, we need to tell Jane Austen for the TikTok generation. It doesn't feel like that. There are no memes. There's nothing quippy in the writing where it feels lazy and modern and kind of hopelessly dated immediately.
Yeah,
but neither is it overly fussy or wooden or overly classical. Every moment of this feels genuine, dramatic, weighty, human. There's a yearning to the characters. There's a liveliness, a strain, an earnestness. I'm using all of these descriptors because it's a difficult phenomenon to describe. It's a Goldilocks moment where you nail that careful balance. It's a perfect calibration between the writing, the casting, the costuming, the hair, the way it's shot, the way it's color graded, the way it's edited. It's something that requires almost a perfectly tuned in vision from that one writer-director, captain of the ship behind it, to pull together that vision throughout the process of a production.
Yeah.
And the result here is timeless and magnetic. It has my highest praise, respect, and admiration. And that's why I think it can sit next to something like Amadeus or Dead Poets Society or Whiplash or Little Women, because those all have that timelessness where, yes, you can tell that Amadeus wasn't made in the 2020s.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't feel like one of those clunky, awful, like BBC TV movies.
Dreadfully slow
about
paced.
a time.
Yeah.
There's something lively and honest and true to it.
Yeah.
There's that humanity that's aching through Dead Poets Society. It doesn't matter that you know what Ethan Hawke looks like now. It doesn't feel like it just feels like a movie.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to reach this pantheon, this timeless thing. And I think the easiest way to get there is something like Whiplash, which almost feels like a black box theater production, where it's a couple actors in a dark room, and it's about their relationship.
Yeah.
The drumming is almost ancillary.
Sure.
It's about the looks between student and teacher.
Yes.
And that kind of writhing hatred and jealousy and approval between them. And that one's almost immediately timeless because it barely has a setting.
Right.
But for this to be such a period piece that is so dialed in and carefully tuned makes it all that more impressive almost.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it that you liked the most about the writing element of this? Like, this is a movie about a writer, about a creator, and it's about her writing. So what did you like about it? What truth did it convey that really spoke to you?
Well, some of it was the difficulty and the solitude. Every time they develop these motifs of sound, where the first time you hear the claret speak, he's talking about rain.
Yes.
And then later on in the movie, when someone's thinking about him but he's not present in the scene, you have the sound of rain. Yeah. And you develop that when there's some sort of difficulty writing, or someone sits down at the desk and there's nothing else to distract them, they open the window.
Yeah.
And there is that invocation of nature or the muse or whatever delivers you ideas, because it's not something any human being can control.
Yeah.
I have weeks where I just sit there waiting for something to happen, trying to will it to happen.
Right.
And if it's not there on a day, you can push, you can try to outline, you can try to edit. But if it's not there, it's not there.
Yeah. I mean, the question is asked multiple times by multiple people about multiple people. Where do you get your ideas?
And there's such a desperation in that because you don't know. But when they're rolling, it's the best feeling ever. And when they're not there, I mean, I've said this to you before, it feels like you wake up one day and none of your senses or limbs work. And you just feel utterly helpless and immovable. But this movie, I mean, amidst a climate in the 2020s, and I don't really care for art that feels like a Twitter thread where it's like commenting on current social topics.
Sure.
I think that usually ages poorly,
Yes.
takes you out of the narrative. It becomes sort of a fourth wall lecture more than storytelling. But in an environment right now of, I mean, all this bullshit about censoring art, revising art after someone dies with Roald Dahl and James Bond the last couple of weeks, there's this endless flood of targeted harassment campaigns, book burnings, boycotts, these scarlet letters that are being thrown around across mediums. In that environment, to have a movie that is so earnest about the creation process, about true artistic creation, which is so ethereal and honest and limitless, to have characters stand on top of a rooftop, basically, and scream freedom and thought out into the void, that's what spoke to me. Because that, whatever that thing is that talks to you and gives you those ideas, there's no limit on it. All there is the pursuit. It's the same thing if you're trying to tell a joke. You're going for whatever's going to get someone to laugh. When you're writing, you're going for whatever idea is going to make the scene better, is going to tell your story better. You don't put all of those like bumpers like it's a bowling alley. That doesn't exist in a creative mind. You're trying to tell a story. Like I remember I had a conversation with someone a couple of years ago about writing and characters and different opinions, and they didn't understand why you would ever write a character who had opinions that you didn't agree with.
Oh, wow.
And my takeaway from that conversation was that person is not creative. Because you can't be and think that way. They're not mouthpieces. They're characters you want to watch. Like telling a story, if you let it go organically, if you don't beat it into being some sort of screed on an opinion you believe is accurate, if it's not some fake morality play that no one cares about, the story is about being interesting, and it will go places you never expect. You have absolutely no control over the thing.
Interesting.
I talked about this a little bit in the multiverse episode that we did last week on Substack. But that idea of you're not telling the horse where to go. You're holding onto the reins desperately, and the thing is sprinting down this track that you're still building in your mind. There is a helplessness. There's a romanticism to the creative process, and especially writing, because especially in this time period, there is no computer, there is no internet, there is no chat GPT or whatever to do the work for you, which has no soul anyway. It's just you at a desk. And there are so many shots of this, of just a piece of paper with some ideas that can, like when the claret drops the poem, when Emily, she leaves a piece of paper behind and he picks it up and he starts reading this sort of erotic poem, and he gasps and drops it. The power of that, of the pen and the piece of paper, the power of sitting down at a desk and just something happens, something comes in, the scene with the mask. It's that ethereal quality that this movie grasped for and caught as well as anything else. That the second half of Amadeus, I think, is about creation and the act of I'm trying not to spoil Amadeus, but go watch that because it's so ethereal. The construction of a creative work. And it's such a blind process. I think this captured that feeling and that desperation really well.
I like how abstracted they make it, because even though you have concrete things like her love affair with the curate, and her being considered weird and odd, like those are things that are specifically in Wuthering Heights, but it's not like she doesn't meet somebody named Heathcliff or she doesn't like go to this place called Wuthering Heights, or she doesn't like have an encounter with a ghost or anything like that. Like instead she sort of creates an encounter with a ghost and has a tragic love affair that's not exactly like Heathcliff and Kathy. Like it's very different, but those like abstracted elements are there, and you do get the sense that she couldn't help writing Wuthering Heights, and you see the power of what she's written, like with the poem, like you said, and with when Charlotte first reads it and she just comes sobbing into the room and says, "I hate you," because it's so good. And then even Emily demanding that Charlotte burn all of her other writing because she doesn't want anybody to see it, and for who knows what other reasons.
Right. And it's not explained.
No, and that's because it doesn't need to be, because that's not the point.
When she has the conversation with Branwell and she tells him that he's not a good writer.
That's such a good conversation. Such a good scene.
He wants to be a good writer.
Yeah.
In the same way a lot of people want to be good creatives.
Of course, yeah. Who doesn't?
But if you don't, like, it's weird because a good storyteller, to whatever, subjective judgment you give that, a good storyteller and a bad storyteller, they're working from the same place. Like their cars have the same engine in them, but one of them just finds that. They find that spot, they ride that wave, and it gets them to that place.
Yeah.
And I loved seeing both sides of that coin, because when it's like a pseudo biopic, their life inspired the story. Shakespeare in Love, even though I put it on my list, it's a little bit more eye-rolly than this.
Oh, yeah.
The performances are fantastic. Joseph Fiennes is incredible in that, but that story is a little more fluffy faded and easy and one-to-one with his life, inspiring the different parts of it.
Right.
This one had a difficulty that I think elevated it beyond. I think that's why I put The Exorcist on here, because that's a movie. I mean, you wouldn't call that a movie about writing or creating art.
Right.
But I think that's that central conflict within the younger priest, Father Karras, something like that. That's his name.
I can picture him, but I don't know
his like struggle with faith. I feel like there's almost a creativity to that.
Yeah.
In the relationship he has, whether he's writing sermons or studying text.
Yeah.
There's that same struggle that I thought was evoked here. The difficulty, the relationship with life and art and expression.
Yeah.
I loved that seeking.
Me too. And I think another way that this felt modern, but in a really, really like subtle and respectful way, was so Emily Bronte and her all three sisters, when they wrote and they all published novels, and they published them under male pseudonyms for obvious reasons, right? Because that's more likely to get bought and read and stuff. And then eventually, like years later, it was like, oh, actually, this is the name of the writer. She's a woman. In this movie, they don't do that. They have her name written on the manuscript, and there's really not much talk in this movie about the difficulty of being a woman writer. Not that it's not there. Like you see the difficulties of and the limitations of being a woman in this movie, but that's not what it's about. It's much more about that, just the struggle of being a creator and not the struggle of being a woman. And I really liked that, because it didn't invalidate whatever struggles that the real Emily Bronte and any woman in that time would have experienced because of their gender. But it wasn't about that, because I feel like at this point in 2023, we've seen plenty of movies and stories about how hard it was to be a woman before, 5 years ago and even is now. Like, we get it. That's not the point of this movie. We're honoring her as a creator, and we're not just limiting her and defining her as a woman writer. Like, it's just about being a creator and being a writer, which I really, really liked.
It speaks to something more universal and human.
Yeah.
Because I think everyone who's ever lived has at least had a creative impulse or desire or a need to express something. Yeah. I mean, that's what, if my life is pretty simple. Half of it is writing and half of it is reading or in some other way consuming art. But the theme is art.
Yeah.
Like, it's you and it's art.
Right.
And I when I watch a movie now or a series or something I know we're probably going to cover on the show, I feel this urge, this desire to express my feelings about it. I mean, if I love it, it's to explain why I love it or figure out what works so well in it. If I don't like it, it's to figure out what they could have done differently.
Yeah.
Or what, the same thing we've done for other stories like that. But I feel that urge. And I think that is a universal thing.
Yeah.
So I agree that the way this story is told speaks to everyone.
Yeah.
Regardless of demographic trait. I think it's a wonderfully sympathetic portrait.
Yeah, I agree. And I think how did you describe this a few minutes ago? You described this movie as like it didn't matter what it was about. It's about the characters, right? And I think Wuthering Heights is like that as well. Like, the plot of Wuthering Heights is very specific and very intense, and there's a lot that goes on. But the point of that book, I think, and the way that book shines is the characters. And and I've mentioned like the subtle similarities to Wuthering Heights in this movie of the romance and the landscapes and the ghosts, but it's so subtle. But even still, I feel like this is the best Wuthering Heights adaptation I've ever seen.
Interesting.
Like, it's not meant to be like in the way that Shakespeare in Love is really an adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. Like, it's just a different version of that story. It's not that direct or overt, but I feel like this movie captures Wuthering Heights better than like any other movie I've seen. Not that I've seen like every Wuthering Heights adaptation ever, but I think this is a very good Wuthering Heights adaptation. And now I want to read it.
That idea you brought up of her books not being immediately published under her own name, which probably means they weren't published under her name in her lifetime.
Well, not in her lifetime, because she died the year
That's
after it was. But it wasn't that much longer after she died.
But when she's very ill towards the end, which is a spoiler for history, I guess.
I already said she died when she was 30. So
when she's ill towards the end, and she has the copies of Wuthering Heights on the end table next to her.
Yeah,
there was such a searing, aching compassion to that, to let her see her name on this defining work of her life next to her.
And I like that they gave her that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was something so sad and yearning about giving her that thing that she was denied in her tragically short life. It reminded me of Tarantino saving Sharon Tate at the end of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
There was that same aching compassion.
Yeah. They gave her a love story. They gave her this
a happier ending.
Recognition. Yeah.
Some sort of validation, some sort of
Yeah.
Right.
And even like in reality, Jane Eyre, which Charlotte Bronte wrote, was published, I think in 1847 or 40, like around the same time as or before Wuthering Heights. But the way this movie paints it is as if she was inspired after Emily's death and wrote it. It doesn't overtly say that. You don't see her write Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte,
right.
But it's heavily implied. But again, like it's not about being accurate. It's giving Emily that recognition and giving her and having, Charlotte be inspired by her work.
Right.
Even though, I mean, it's unclear what their relationship was like. They kind of paint it as though in the movie, it's like Emily and Charlotte are really, really close, and then they're not. I think in reality, Emily and Anne were much closer, and Charlotte wasn't like not close with her. But a lot of the accounts we have of Emily are from Charlotte, but they're heavily like criticized as being like not accurate.
Sure.
Because it's like it's completely biased because it's her sister. But they kind of. That's not the point. They're not trying to be accurate in this movie. They're trying to sort of give Emily this really great version of her life story, but not romanticizing it at all, because her life is horrible in this movie. But we give her these small things like the recognition and the influence, and the love story, even though it is tragic and ends horribly.
Sure. Amidst that sort of difficulty of composition, like you see almost to a surreal or exaggerated degree in The Shining. You have that here, but it's against a pastoral backdrop, so you read it differently. Yeah. But it has that same kind of yearning humanity to it. Yeah, I just thought this was incredible. Yeah. Emily, written and directed by Frances O'Connor. It seems like it's going wider right now, the theatrical release, so go see it in the theater if you can. Yeah. It is immaculate.
I would like to read a quote for you if I can.
All right.
I was looking into Emily Bronte, and I said that Charlotte's accounts of Emily were highly biased, and it's kind of hard to see how true they are, especially because a lot of them are written after she died. So but a fun one I found is not from Charlotte. It's from Constantin Heger, who was the head of the academy that Emily and Charlotte attended when they went to Brussels. Remember when she goes off to Brussels with Charlotte? Yeah, remember in the movie when she like goes off because she thinks her romance with the guy is done, and then he dies while she's there. Oopsie. But she's there, and this quote is from this real person describing Emily. He says, "She should have been a man, a great navigator. Her powerful reason would have deduced new spheres of discovery from the knowledge of the old, and her strong, imperious will would never have been daunted by opposition or difficulty, never have given way but with life. She had a head for logic and a capability of argument unusual in a man and rarer indeed in a woman. Impairing this gift was her stubborn tenacity of will, which rendered her obtuse to all reasoning where her own wishes or her own sense of right was concerned. I feel like this movie captured that fantastically.
Which is so difficult to do.
Yes, even though, like we said, there are all these plot points and elements that are not true. By putting them together in this way, it conveys that truth.
What is true, though?
Right.
Does it tell the story, or is it a Wikipedia entry?
Right, exactly.
Because they're not the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
So we'll be back on Friday with another discussion about The Witcher.
Yeah.
Those are really getting fruitful for me. I mean,
it's
they've always
really
been fun to do, but I feel like the last few we've really gone deep.
Yeah, if you haven't been here for our Witcher coverage, start over.
Try one out.
Go back.
We recap the story if you haven't read the book.
That's
so
true.
You can kind of, I don't know, do a dry run of trying the story with our discussion. But yeah, we get all excited. Those are really good.
Yeah, they're fun.
We're also on Substack, where we do bonus episodes every month. I just did one on why I hate the multiverse from the perspective of a writer. We've got a bunch of other ones on there, from horror movies and Maggie talking about her history of true crime, me talking about different things. It's a lot of fun over there.
And again, if you want more period film stuff, we did Pride and Prejudice, Emma, and Persuasion. I feel like there's another one that we did in there.
I'm sure.
Yeah, anyway.
We've done 233 of these. So yeah, there are definitely some other ones.
Yeah, go check it out.
Everywhere on social media where it matters, we are Second Breakfast Pod. Check out the YouTube. I've been trying to revamp that lately and give it some more life. Since House of the Dragon, it went a little dormant. So yeah, we're around, and we'll be back on Friday with the next Witcher discussion. Go see this movie.
Go see it.
Oh, it's so good.
It's amazing.
All right, cool.
All right, toodaloo.
Our highest endorsement since Banshees and the Whale.
For real. Okay, bye.